Shalom. This week's Torah portion is Parashat Yitro, named for the father-in-law of Moses. Last week in Parashat Beshalach, we learned of Israel's dramatic exit from Egyptian bondage. Our parsha continues with this destiny-charged journey and focuses on Israel's arrival at their destination, which was the entire purpose of leaving Egypt altogether, to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. In fact, as we'll learn, it was the entire purpose of creation, and thus everything has been leading up to this. As the parsha begins, Yitro, Moshe's father-in-law, hears about the great miracles that God wrought for Israel during the exodus from Egypt, the splitting of the sea and the war with Amalek. He takes his daughter Tzipporah, Moshe's wife, and their two children, Gershom and Eliezer, and goes out to the desert, where Moshe meets him and recounts to him the details of all these events. Yitro is overjoyed to receive this news, and he brings an offering to God and participates in a festive meal with Aaron together with all the elders of Israel. The next day, Yitro witnesses an amazing scene that he cannot comprehend. His son-in-law Moshe sits in session the entire day, judging the people, meaning everyone and everybody came to Moshe to settle every dispute and difference that would arise between them and guide the people in every situation, instructing and advising them. An entire nation, numbering well over 1 million people, including women and children, in the desert, temporarily homeless, wandering in the wilderness. We can imagine that people had issues. Things come up between man and wife, between neighbors. It's only natural, especially when you've been a slave until now. Nobody's ever told me, what are my rights and what are my obligations? Moshe, by way of divine inspiration, single-handedly provided the answers. But Yitro tells him, you're not going to be able to keep this up. It's not good for you, and it's not good for the people. He advises Moshe to appoint judges, really to establish a judicial system consisting of men who have the impeccable qualities of strength, fear of God, men of truth who detest corruption. He advises him to organize a system that he can oversee, consisting of officers over groups of 10, 50, 100, and 1,000. Basically a system of lower courts, higher courts, and the Supreme Court, to which an appeal, where the most difficult cases would be brought, and that's Moshe himself. Moshe indeed accepts this advice, and Hashem himself agrees. And now Yitro, former high priest of Midian and formerly the world's greatest expert on idolatry and false beliefs, is sent back to his land by his son-in-law Moshe to teach his family and countrymen about his newfound faith and knowledge of the one God of Israel. That must have been a challenge, considering that Yitro had been a famous, rather infamous idolater. Now he had to tell all his followers and fans that he had been wrong. It takes a lot of conviction, a lot of courage. But we'll talk more about Yitro in this week's Jerusalem Lights podcast. The central concept of this week's Torah portion of Yitro is Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, the ultimate meeting of God and man, the event referred to as Ma'amad Har Sinai, the Sinai revelation. It's also the central event of the entire Torah and the foundation of our very lives. This was an event witnessed by the entire world, and unlike anything in this world, unlike anything the world had ever seen. It was an acute, cogent revelation of God with no previous or later parallel, which changed the shape of history because it demonstrated God's involvement with and caring about this world of ours. Now, last week, in the portion of Beshalach, we learned that the nation of Israel experienced a truer perception of reality at Kriyat Yamsuf, at the splitting of the sea. Walking through the sea on dry land, every man, woman, and child was able to understand on the deepest soul level that all the suffering and travail that they had experienced in Egypt was not true reality. Yes, it happened, and it was difficult for sure. They suffered. But what they perceived at the sea was the deepest knowledge that even though their previous experiences had manifested as reality, for sure it was real, but in its essence it was still an illusion because only Hashem himself is real. Hashem is the only thing that lasts, and the only part of us that lasts is the part that's connected to him. The experience at the sea had shown them that our perception of reality is an illusion because the fleeting physicality of our world distracts us from understanding things as they really are. But when we can peel away the filters and obstructions created by our own expectations and the limitations of our own senses, limitations that our short-sightedness places upon us, then we are no longer subject to the illusions of this world, what we refer to as reality, and then we can be elevated to the place of seeing the world as it really is, which is none other than a manifestation of pure godliness. Now, the preparation for the sojourn in Egypt for the tribes of Israel, prepared in advance by Yosef, the descent of Yaakov and his sons and their subsequent enslavement in Egypt, the 10 plagues and the miraculous exodus from Egypt, all this, all history really until now, has been leading up to and was intended as preparation for one goal only, for the sake of the giving of the Torah. The first time that Moshe met Hashem, God told him, "And this will be the sign that I sent you when I take out the people from Egypt. You will serve God on this mountain." What is the sign? Rashi explains that the words, "you will serve God on this mountain," teach us that Hashem's plan was for Israel to leave Egypt in order to receive the Torah on this mountain. Everything, all of history, in fact, creation itself really, had been leading up to this event. At the very onset of creation, we are taught, God conditioned the continued existence of the world upon Israel's eventual acceptance of the Torah. Our sages teach that the foundations of creation itself, the whole world, was sort of on hold until Israel accepted the Torah at Sinai, and when the nation accepted the responsibility, the solidity of the pillars of heaven and earth, as it were confirmed. God said, this is going to work after all, because someone is taking responsibility to teach the world that I am here. So, as great as that heretofore unparalleled prophetic experience at the sea was, it paled by comparison to the level to which the nation of Israel rose here in Parashat Yitro at the Sinai revelation. The Midrash reveals amazing details about this staggering event. The sages relate that all of Israel ascended to an unparalleled level of consciousness, and all who were sick were temporarily healed. The descriptions of the event seem so fantastic. Hashem spoke in simultaneous fashion, uttering all of the commandments at once. How would you describe that? Like layer upon layer of overlaid speech. Both the manner of speech described and the hearing of such speech is something beyond human comprehension. His voice was heard from one end of the world to the other, with every sound that emanated the world was filled with a beautiful aroma. Every word was heard in 70 languages, the languages of the world. Every soul that was ever destined to be born till the end of time was present and accepted its portion of the Torah. And thus our sages teach that all creativity and innovation in thought and inspiration, even every question posed by every student to a teacher throughout the ages, it's all drawn from Mount Sinai. When God gave the Torah, no bird flapped its wings or chirped, no ox made a sound, the waves of the sea stood still, all the world was silent, and all the creatures mute, as Hashem declared, I am Hashem your God. The very heavens and the earth were moved, the seas and rivers fled, the mountains moved, the trees bowed, the dead came back to life and stood on their feet. Such are just a few of the descriptions, the backstory of this monumental event. But what does all this really mean for us in practical sense? Indeed, the descriptions sound fanciful if we don't understand and appreciate the device employed by our wise sages, the poetic vehicle of the homiletical words of the Midrash that are designed to wake us up and impart to us life lessons of what Torah really is and what the opportunity of our acceptance of Hashem's commandments really affords us. So open up your heart in the deepest way. It all boils down to this. The Torah is the manifestation of Hashem's will and purpose in creation, which is what? What again is the purpose of creation? To know that there is a God. For man to know that there is a God. Not as a matter of belief, but as a matter of clear, solid, irrefutable knowledge. This is what the Sinai revelation experience imparted to Israel, and it's Israel's responsibility to give that knowledge over to the world. Thus we read in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 32 to 35, when Moshe is reviewing all of this. For ask now, regarding the early days that were before you, since the day that God created man upon the earth, from one end of the heavens to the other end of the heavens, whether there was ever anything like this great thing, or was the likes of it heard, Did ever a people hear God's voice speaking out of the midst of the fire as you have heard and live? Or has any God performed miracles to come and take him a nation from the midst of another nation with trials, with signs, and with wonders, and with war and a strong hand, and with an outstretched arm, and with great awesome deeds, as all that Hashem, your God, did for you in Egypt before your eyes? And Moshe continues, you have been shown in order to know that Hashem, he is God. There is none else besides him. There's none else besides him means that there is nothing else beside him. And it's not only a matter of belief, it's a knowledge thing. The first of the 10 commandments, which are the encapsulation of the giving of the Torah in this week's portion of Yitro, states, I am Hashem your God, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt from the house of slavery. But what is this commandment? This is a commandment. It appears to be a statement. The first commandment, upon which all the commandments, indeed upon which our lives depend, is to believe that there is a God. Because otherwise the ensuing commandments are meaningless, because their relevance and application can be a matter of personal opinion. So they are predicated on the belief that God gave them. But the Sinai experience goes beyond belief and enters the realm of fact. Fact is based on knowledge. You have been shown in order to know that Hashem, he is God. There's none else beside him. What the nation experienced collectively and bequeathed to all subsequent generations through our DNA is knowledge. And the event was witnessed and heard by the entire world. It's indeed a positive commandment to believe in God, but emunah, belief, is only the beginning. There's a popular statement that belief begins where science ends off. But actually, the Sinai experience is the opposite. The foundation of our relationship with Hashem and recognition of him at Sinai is a foundation of solid knowledge, which we gain directly by way of our own senses. And thus, the Torah testifies, you saw that from the heavens I spoke with you. We said earlier that it's the limitation of our own senses that hold us back, that organize our perception of reality and make sure that our experiences, which we channel through our 5 senses, always meet our expectations. But after the 10 commandments are spoken, we read chapter 20 and verse 15, the entire people saw the thunder and the flames, the sound of the shofar and the smoking mountain. The people saw and trembled and stood from afar. They saw the sound of the shofar. This is not a misprint. The experience of Sinai was so powerful and comprehensive, this meeting with the divine brought about such pure prophetic inspiration, that the senses were uplifted beyond their borders and no longer conveyed or contained or limited reality according to expectation, but rather as it really is. This was a reflection of a level of true knowledge, knowledge that transcends the limitations of so-called reality, a knowledge of the reality of Hashem so total and so clear that it could no longer be categorized. It was total, inclusive, comprehensive, acquired knowledge. It was so comprehensive that it transcended any previous experience and transcended the limitations of the physical senses. The senses were unified and no longer served to hold back reality, which is their primary function. And what does this mean? All who were sick were healed. It's because the root cause of all of our ailments comes from our self-imposed distancing from Hashem in our lives, the concealment of his presence. Not that people who have a relationship with Hashem don't get sick, but when we can truly be connected to Hashem and understand that at the root, everything is for the good and part of Hashem's plan for us, we can begin to heal. Just as last week in Parashat Bishalach, Moshe was shown how to sweeten the bitter water with the wood, to sweeten bitterness with the root itself through the understanding that everything is Hashem's will, both the good and what we perceive to be the bad. Thus Hashem assured us again last week in Parashat Bishalach, in chapter 15 and verse 26, if you hearken diligently to the voice of Hashem your God, and do what is just in his eyes, give ear to his commandments, and observe all his decrees, then any of the diseases that I placed in Egypt I will not bring upon you. For I am Hashem, your healer. What are these diseases that I placed in Egypt? Recall that we learned that Egypt, Mitzrayim, is the narrow place where we were enslaved to Pharaoh's mind control and the banality of meaningless existence, exemplified by the limitations of time. The mitzvah, the commandment of Kiddush HaChodesh, the sanctification of the new moon that we learned about in Parshat Bo in Exodus 12, liberated Israel from the constraints of time, and the observance of Hashem's commandments assures us, it keeps us free. A relationship with Hashem is the healing of the human condition. Or as our sages pithily observe, who is one who is truly free? One who is subservient, enslaved to the Torah. Because a relationship isn't about how one feels or about lip service. It's about doing. It has to be based on action, based on a covenant. That's what makes a relationship real. And why was Hashem's voice heard around the world and in every language if only Israel accepted the Torah? Because the world was set straight in its orbit in the merit of Israel's covenant. This is the moment that creation had been waiting for, and the whole world was witness. And just as Israel received responsibility for the world, just as Israel's job is to teach the world to sing, I know I'm dating myself, the nations of the world, too, became responsible to aid Israel and to learn from Israel's spiritual path and to spread this message, as did Yitro. Another reason why he's such a central figure and the very parsha of the giving of the Torah is named for him. The experience of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai is the cornerstone of Jewish identity, but it's also the most significant event in the history of the world since creation, because, once again, it demonstrated God's involvement with and caring about this world of ours. The living word of Hashem that resonates within the Torah is not a thing of the past, nor is it coming from the past. And as I'm fond of quoting William Faulkner, the past is not dead, it's not even past. Torah flows through our veins today, living with us in the present, and knowledge of Hashem is irrefutable knowledge and is the hope of the future for all humanity. Torah for everyone.